Welcome. On behalf of the Board of Directors of the Michigan Center for Early Christian Studies, I welcome you to today's public lecture with Professor Tina Pippin of Agnes Scott College. But before I formally introduce her, I'd like to tell you more about the Michigan Center for Early Christian Studies. The Michigan Center for Early Christian Studies, or as we refer to it, MCECS, the acronym, is a nonprofit research association in Ann Arbor, Michigan, for the academic study of Christianity. Our organization developed from four principles. First, the academic study of Christianity is a study of the fabric of culture. The study of Christianity bears witness to the cultural developments of the last 2,000 years worldwide. Culture, particularly Western culture, though a somewhat problematic term, can't be adequately understood without a formal study of Christianity. The second principle of the MCECS is that Christianity did not develop in isolation from other religious traditions. The traditions and practices of Christianity reflect the early relationships with and parting of the ways with Judaism and other traditions, including Greek and Roman religious traditions. Likewise, Islam, that embodies and reflects some traditions of Judaism and Christianity. For instance, the prophets of the Old and New Testaments are very similar to the prophets in the Quran. The third and very important principle for our postmodern world, or post-postmodern world, is that the MCECS develops programming and supports the academic study of Christianity as a way to appreciate and increase biblical literacy today. The fourth principle of the MCECS is that Christianity is not limited to the study of sacred texts or church history. As a foundational cultural agent, Christianity is reflected in various forms of media, art, architecture, and even textiles. We're dedicated to exploring how these varied manifestations of Christianity preserve and shape Christian beliefs and practices. Tonight's presentation is yet another example of such an exploration. The MCECS is a registered 501c3 nonprofit corporation. We support the above principles by offering programs such as international conferences, publications, and lecture series, of which tonight's event is one of such series, and through financial support to faculty and undergraduate and graduate students at the University of Michigan and other institutions. Additional information about our activities is available on our website, mcecs.org. Please consider partnering with us to support the academic study of Christianity. We greatly appreciate any donation you can make to support our mission and purpose, which you can do at our website. Again, that's mcecs.org. Now, tonight's lecture, Rapture Ready, the Rapture in the American Imagination, will be given tonight by Professor Tina Pippin, Wallace M. Alston Professor of Bible and Religion at Agnes Scott College in Decatur, Georgia. She holds a PhD from the Southern Baptist Seminary. Her academic interests are wide-ranging and include Bible and culture, women and religion, ethics, science and religion, human rights education, religion and postmodernism, feminism, and apropos of tonight's presentation, apocalypticism. And with that, I give you over to Professor Pippin.
Oh, thank you, John and Megan, and all of you out there for having me tonight to talk about the rapture. I should do a little disclaimer in terms of my own social location, since I come from the southern United States, from way eastern part of North Carolina, and grew up in an Episcopal church where there was never a mention of the rapture, and I didn't discover the rapture until high school with friends who were part of Baptist and non-denominational churches who believed in the rapture and tried to point it out to me in scripture, and it was very confusing. And then I got to Mars Hill College in the western part of the state. It's now Mars Hill University, and had Dr. James L. Blevins, whose major work was in the Apocalypse of John, and he had classes perform John and sing the hymns in modern Greek. And the book as it as frightening as it is most of the time, came alive, and I got interested in finding out what all the fuss was about in culture and in biblical text. So I've got a slideshow to share, and then I will um, talk about, here we go. Okay, let me set it up. All right. At the end, you get extra points if you know where this picture is from, because we're doing some cultural studies here and some pop culture. The Society of Biblical Literature has a popular culture in America and Bible and popular culture in America section, and they do really, really good work. And they do all kinds of biblical connections in popular culture. And we're going to talk about some of those tonight. And then I teach a course called The Politics of Apocalypse. And for some crazy reason, I decided to teach it last fall during the election. So I'll talk a little bit about the political connections with the rapture, which are, it's a thick thread. Okay. There are signs even all over a big city, metropolitan city like Atlanta, Georgia. And here is one, not too far from my house. And I missed it because it was last November, last September. Okay. So just kind of a summary of when we're talking about rapture. The rapture is a sudden and hoped for event of the second coming of Christ. And, there was the ascension of Jesus in the New Testament. Well, the longer ending of Mark, and then Luke tells of an ascension. And, where Jesus goes up into heaven, is taken up. And then there is a hope for event where Jesus comes down in the clouds and the believers are caught up and go with Jesus into heaven. This is not in the Book of Common Prayer in the Episcopal Church. So I had to learn this. And so I'm going to take you through what I found, and you will probably know, 100 more. The rapture is everywhere, either explicitly or implicitly. So only the true believers are raptured. And from what I have heard, Episcopalians are not in that group. So, but you'll see rapture images and theology in film, in fiction, and television in particular. So, from the faith perspective, the rapture is a major theme in Christian fiction. If you know, as you probably do, the Left Behind series, Tim LaHaye and Jerry Jenkins. And Jerry Jenkins' son, of course, does the series about Jesus, Life of Jesus, The Chosen, and then the spinoffs from that. And the rapture follows a historical timeline of political and historical events. It's not separated from that in the United States. So representations of the rapture in popular culture often reflect the current political climate and psychological anxiety, isolation, and the sense of persecution of believers. So, flying dreams, dreams of being airborne, leaving the sinful world and all the sinners behind in a cloud of chaos, is the ultimate end time fantasy. The event comes, as they say, in the wink of an eye. It's really quick. But the before and after stories have like multiple retellings. And if you look at the Left Behind series, there is the primary series that starts right before the rapture and then goes through the tribulation. And then you have the spinoffs, the prequel, the kids in New Babylon High School is endless. There are board games. There are games you can play on your computer. They're quite violent. Anyway, where they're mostly post-rapture because that's where the real drama is. And those who've been raptured get to look on at this. So there are biblical roots, supposedly. I really don't find the rapture in the Bible, but I'll give you the King James Version, and then I'm going to give you another translation. So 1 Thessalonians 4:15 through 17 is really where like kind of ground zero for the rapture. Um, let's see. Verse 17. Then we which are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. And so shall we ever be with the Lord. And then you can see in the New Living Translation something similar, but then it's even more colloquial. Then we will be with the Lord forever. Um, a lot of Pauline scholars say this, Paul's early believers had questions about, what if people died before Jesus was resurrected, then where are they? And will we see our loved ones in the end time? And he was answering a pastoral concern. And so the uh, the term rapture actually comes from the 4th century, and the Vulgate or Latin translation that Jerome and probably the nuns, Paula and her sisters, who did a lot of the translating, caught up was translated into a word that became in medieval Latin rapture, to simplify it. And then I'll show you how that got developed into this whole blown up rapture theology. So premillennialist thought. The rapture, there's post-millennial, millennial, but I want to stick with premillennialist thought because that's where the rapture is most prominent. And I've got a bunch of charts here. Basically, the rapture happens suddenly and believers are caught up in the air. Those who are left behind or left below have a 7-year, by most of the premillennial thought, a 7-year period of tribulation where you see the rise of the Antichrist. Now, Trinity Broadcast Network did 2 films, Omega Code and Omega Code 2 Megiddo. And they had the rise of the Antichrist, but there was no rapture. And they had this was, gosh, 20 plus years ago. They had a special showing for pastors in Atlanta, and I was able to get a ticket and go. And Paul and Matthew Crouch from Trinity Broadcast Network, and quite charismatic preachers. And they were selling the film as a date night film for churches. You could go and then you could have conversations afterwards about the film. And so I asked, where was the rapture? Because there was no rapture in these films. And they said, well, it didn't fit the script. So the rapture usually fits the script. And if you've seen Omega Code or Omega Code 2, it's mostly centered around, like in the Left Behind series, the remnant that remains, that gets the remnant that gets converted into Christianity. And then there are so many timelines. You've got, and this is at the end of the church age, according to some of the late 19th and early 20th century theology. And then on the right, you can't read it, but just so you can see, Daniel, the book of Revelation, because the book of Revelation uses a lot of Daniel. You can see the rapture, the 7-year tribulation, and then the second coming, or in Greek, the parousia of Jesus. Jesus comes back and defeats Satan or the Antichrist. And then there is a 1,000-year reign, and then Satan reappears, and there's a final defeat and final judgment. And the New Jerusalem comes down. That's basically. So, popular culture. There are several sites where you can, if you are a believer, you can write a letter that gets opened after you are raptured to your loved ones so that you can tell them to convert, and so that they will eventually be with you in heaven after the tribulation. So you can look these up online. They're quite detailed, and they're evangelizing letters. So okay, back to history. We've got the roots of the rapture are with Cyrus Scofield and his Scofield Bible, where he used John Darby's notes for the book of Revelation. And this Bible you can still get at Christian bookstores. And it is sort of it's dispensationalist thought, dispensationalism being, the ages have been dispensed, and now the end of the church age will bring the rapture. And so people that we're going to see here in a minute, Hal Lindsey and Jack Van Impe, when he was still around, that they have these news shows where, the news is showing, well, weather, war, plagues, political situations and unrest, feminism, all kinds of things are bringing about the end and bringing it closer and closer. Now, throughout the 20th century, even for a minute, with Billy Graham, there were date setters. Oh, it's going to come on this particular date. And then that date would come, and then there'd be cognitive dissonance because they didn't, Jesus didn't come back. So here's Hal Lindsey, who is the main person here. And his late great Planet Earth was the best-selling nonfiction book of the 1970s. It sold millions of copies, and it continues to sell. And this is where he lays out why in our current well, in the 70s, but he continued to do it, as you see on the right, until his death last fall, looking at, the news for signs of the times, the sign that it was the end was near. We are living in the end time. And that's sort of an existential angst attached to it, right? So you can see here just a few things. I always check in. It's still continuing, but and also Christian Broadcast Network, Pat Robertson, who was more post-millennial, he kind of went back and forth, but his son has continued the 700 Club, and they have an end time show. So you can go on their website, and there are a lot of places you can look for this, and you can see, these sites try to help you discern, who the Antichrist is. And then you can see this LA Apocalypse. You can see Dennis Quaid and Hollywood stars get involved in this oftentimes too. And I think we're seeing now a resurgence of so-called Christian influencers. Most are not of the apocalyptic ilk, but like on apps like Hallow, Liam Neeson reads C.S. Lewis, or Jonathan Rumi, who plays Jesus in The Chosen, reads you Bible passages. Okay. All right. So a few of the books, and I don't own all these books, but I have to say I own a lot of them. So David Jeremiah, The Great Disappearance, 31 Ways to be Rapture Ready. And then Robert Jeffress and Tim LaHaye and Jerry Jenkins, I mentioned before. They have Tim LaHaye has a whole series of books, and this charting the end times, you can, it folds out, and you can look like those other charts, color charts. Then Pat Robertson, End of the Age. I mean, it's all about the end and endings and the ultimate end and the reign of Jesus on earth. And then this one is a little too current, I guess, even though it was several many years ago. Financial Armageddon: What You Must Do to Survive. Um, so, and then John Hagee, Jerusalem is, of course, ground zero. He's like on medieval maps, Jerusalem's in the middle. That's where there's going to be the nation of Israel, then um, sort of a cleansing of the state, and uh, then with the rapture, they will, and Armageddon will happen, and Jesus will reign for 1,000 years. So, okay. So you may have seen bumper stickers or things on windshield, on, windows of cars. In case of rapture, vehicle will be unmanned. Some are who have these are serious about them, and others are being, satirical. So more warning signs. In 2011, um, there was um, Camping, Harold Camping did a whole thing on, Judgment Day was going to come May 21st, 2011, and the Bible guarantees it. And of course, it didn't. And so he had to regroup. And you can see he gets these rapture theologians will find the rapture in every book, including here, Jonah 3:8. But on the right, I was part of an art installation in Decatur, Georgia. And we called it the Pop-Up Apocalypse Show. And there was a billboard like this one, but with the hybrid Whore of Babylon with and beast bottom staring directly at the viewer. On I-16 outside of Dublin, Georgia. It's on Dublin, Georgia is about halfway between Atlanta and Savannah. So it's a really busy way. And the billboard stayed up for years, even though we only paid for it for like a short amount of time. And we found out that the owner of the billboard company liked the sign so much that he kept it up. And ours had, May 14th, 2011. So we beat Harold Camping by about a week. At our show, we had art, music. Someone did a Pegasus you could make fly. We also had dancers, and for reasons that are only artists know, we had weightlifters, women weightlifters from Savannah. But it was a whole show to talk about the apocalypse and how it has permeated our culture. We did a whole week. We had Professor Carol Newsom, who is now retired, but professor of Hebrew Bible at Candler School of Theology, come and talk about apocalypse, and we did a whole thing around it. So, so the rapture as end time fantasy, you see it in the sort of hybrid mix that you see in a lot of Christian rapture fiction, like Left Behind, where the true believers are able to get, to escape, but then they get to watch all the action in the tribulation. So here's a scene from the first Left Behind movie that they didn't do the sequels for a long time because of hiccups and battles in the film. With people trying to claim it. And anyway, it's complicated. But here, you'll see the main character with the backpack, young woman, Chloe. And her father is an airplane pilot who is flying the airplane while people on the airplane disappear. And only their clothes are there, a young woman with young children, her children disappear and it's only their clothes left and people are hysterical and he has to try to land the plane even though, you know, a lot of the planet has disappeared in the rapture. So there's always kind of chaos and car crashes and all of that. There's a site if you want to keep up with the news on the rapture. It's called Rapture Ready. And I'll just, you know, show you a few of these. You can see they have an Israel Watch and Rapture Ready TV and anyway, uh Bible study and all of that. Um so I want to show a couple of videos. These are really short. This is the classic one that all my Baptist friends saw in youth group growing up, and they were meant to scare people, and especially young people, into believing. Because and we wish we'd all been ready was the song of the time. So let's see if I can make this work right. All right. Make sure you can hear it. Okay, so all right. So these films, showed the dropped um hair dryer and the clothes laying in a chair, because for some reason everyone is um raptured in the nude, right? Who knows why? Well, the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist have a doomsday clock and is totally different than the rapture theology, but they also are mapping the end. And I just wanted to mention this because you can look on their website. This is the real frightening thing. It's now 89 seconds to midnight, and it has been, up to 2 minutes. And that they're mapping, of course, atomic weapons um, and not, the rapture coming. Okay, so there are a lot of other films, and we have Mimi Rogers in The Rapture, a woman who believes that the rapture is coming. She's part of a special group, and she goes out into the desert with her daughter, and then it doesn't happen. Demi Moore's Seventh Sign, where she's, um, uh, gets caught up in the prophetic end time. And then Seth Rogen and others with a satirical "This is the End," where you can see at the bottom they get caught up in these beams. And then Craig Robinson and Anna Kendrick in Rapture Palooza, which is um, supposed comedy about the rapture, if the rapture can be funny. So the rapture becomes sort of a floating signifier in popular culture, floating meaning, kind of a pun intended. It's coming any moment, and it's something that makes every space and time apocalyptic. And there's no way to avoid this global event. It's not just happening in the US, it's happening all over the globe. And then there's The Leftovers by Tom Perrotta. And if you've seen the HBO series, it extends what's in the novel. Uh, and it's a story about um, there's some kind of disappearance of about 2% of the population, and no one knows why and what happened. Some people think it was the rapture, and with Jesus coming to meet people in the clouds, and some have no idea, and the world is left well with in fear of where did these people go, in grief and trauma. um, and then, of course, there is the Simpsons Left Below, where um, a parody of the whole Left Behind series, where the believers, and Homer being one of those, um, making light of the fact that God wants to kill everybody. Um, there's several Simpsons that deal with the rapture. There's one where Homer gets everybody to go up to a hill outside of town. Thank God it's Doomsday is that episode. So there, where he convinces people that, this is the date, and then it doesn't happen. And so everyone is, um, uh, not believing Homer anymore about anything. And so, uh, and in one episode, Homer goes up to heaven, but he starts trashing heaven because he misses his family who was left behind. Okay, so similar to rapture theology is the whole concept of dispensationalism and what's called seven mountains theology, where, and this is where you'll see the rapture: government, media, arts, entertainment, business, education, religion, family. And once these seven mountains are in order, some evangelical Christians believe that that's a sign of the coming of Jesus. And so I'll show how this is playing out in current politics. Um, when the U.S. Embassy was moved from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, this during the first Trump administration, it was a huge deal because it was seen as moving us closer to the second coming. And you have these two pastors, John Hagee and Robert Jeffries, who were at and spoke during the moving of during the opening um, of the embassy in Jerusalem. And now we have Mike Huckabee, who's confirmed as President Trump U.S. ambassador to Israel, who also believes that the time is near, and this is all playing out to bring about the return of Jesus. So last fall, um, there was a tradition continued of a lot of antichrist. Um, and this, of course, is Signorelli's famous antichrist. But we also have almost every president. Ronald Wilson Reagan was, because he had three names and six letters in each of the three names, he was 666. Barack Obama was definitely, there were books about it, that he was going to bring about the destruction of the United States. And then, most currently, Kamala Harris and Trump were both seen as dueling antichrist in the election. Um, and you can probably get the shirts more than 10% off now. So Kamala Harris was also connected with the Jezebel spirit, um, that the evil female that was going to bring about the end of time, and had to be defeated. And this was a prophet, Lance Wallnau. There are a lot of social media influencers who are seeing, reading the times, and any women in power who don't support the current administration are, of course, seen in this light. And then fitting into this theology is that the current president is seen as the chosen one, that God chooses imperfect leaders to lead us toward this day where there will be the rapture. King David, King Cyrus, and also Jesus. And the one on the right was done by drawn by someone who was at the trial. Um, when he was convicted of sexual abuse. Okay. So visions of the second coming. I mean, there's just so much on the internet, but that many of these prophecy believers believe that Trump will be the one to usher in the end of days. So a few other scholarly books, um, because the idea of the rapture will continue to fuel escapist visions of the future. In an uncertain time, depending on your belief system, the rapture provides hope in being able to be among the elect and to also be able to survive the current unstable times, and that we're in time of chaos, and um, it gives a certain sense of safety, sort of like a little bit like the bunker movements. So Rapture also props up beliefs in the supernatural spaces of a literal heaven and hell. So it's all kind of connected with that. So the Rapture will continue to be a moneymaker, not in these books. These are more scholarly books. Um, no matter how seriously or trivialized its manifestations. And you can see that, with the Seth Rogen movie and others that are, want to make fun of the belief, but then it's also a moneymaker in those who are serious about it. And the Rapture will continue to be available at bookstores. I see it all the time in grocery stores, in the book racks. I always look for the book racks because there's at Kroger and Publix and other grocery stores, because there's usually something about the end time there. Convenience stores at airports will have Rapture books, and film fiction, games, and astronomical events. Either there's a comet or an eclipse or, um, flooding, fire, earthquakes, nuclear anxieties, and everywhere. The rapture is everywhere, I think, but the Bible, although it's read back into it. And will the end time debate ever be settled? And what is at stake is ultimately not souls, but the need of some to imagine a future with or without God. Okay, I think that's all I got here. So, a little humor at the end. I don't know if you've seen this. If you're tired of waiting, you can have the do-it-yourself Rapture machine. Okay, I'm going to stop share. Sorry about the video. Makes no sense.
It's all right. I'm sure we'll have access to them eventually.
Yeah.
Um, while folks in the chat, I invite you to offer any questions you may have. And while we're waiting for those, I will probably start us off here with one. So you mentioned that the book of Revelation is full of all these sort of dramatic events and that the rapture is not one of them. So do you have thoughts about why popular culture has latched onto this sort of smaller, or like not in Revelation when there's so much in Revelation that could have also potentially been drawn upon?
Yeah. I think, Jerome left a trail for that with the Latin. Um, that to be called up, it, just to be able to all of a sudden be gone from this earth, and to be in heaven with Jesus is sort of an ultimate in time fantasy. There can be several in time fantasies, but that's one that really, um, it happens in the wink of an eye, and you have to be ready. And so it's about a spiritual discipline, it's about a certain kind of faith. And then it's an insider outsider thing too. You can be on the inside. And I know with the Tribulation Trail, um, and they have them all over the country, but in Stockbridge, Georgia, a church does a really, really good job with their Tribulation Trail. And the rapture is at the very, very beginning. And it is quite moving to see, um, a woman come out on her porch and the stroller is empty. Where's her baby? Right. And you see this in the Left Behind movie too, a woman who's driving and her baby's no longer in the car seat behind. Um, and so you know, it hits a kind of emotional chord. And going through the tribulation, you really, you know, where the Antichrist takes over and, you know, the world it's like, you know, some dystopian show like The Walking Dead or The Last of Us has just started season 2, um, where, you know, or it's just marauders and, you know, no place is safe um, and in Tribulation Trail, you do get an opportunity to accept the mark of the beast. You get to make a choice. And so I thought, well, it's much more interesting to get the mark of the beast, right? Because then you get to see more of the play. And um, yeah. So, and at the end, there's the last judgment. And um, I never was really clear why the pastor who had donate, you know, given his life for Christ his whole career didn't make it into heaven. I wanted to object, but who knows? Yeah, how did Darby and then Schofield? Yeah. The notes that Darby made were his own theology about the end of time. And so let me see. Let's see. Yeah. Um, Yeah. Okay. These will take a minute.
Yeah, I've been skimming them. It seems that both our question from Joshua Scott and and one of our earlier questions from James DeFranco have they're thinking about sort of the de-emphasizing of ecology and what the rapture means for the planet itself, and sort of how the planet factors into this.
Yeah. And that's why I showed the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, really, to get back to that, is because they're concerned about the continuation of the planet. And in rapture theology, it doesn't really matter because the New Jerusalem's going to come down from heaven. And it's got a particular kind of monoculture, and that's where all the believers will live forever, and that's where the throne room is of God, and it's a, you know, eschatological fantasy. So you don't have to, if you think the world is ending tomorrow, and I think if anyone was around at the turn of the century, Y2K, um, you know, there was a belief that everything would shut down then. People were out buying generators and that kind of thing. And some people thought, well, that is the end of the world. And there's a wonderful film about that, independent film, where Jesus comes back through JFK Airport and has debates with Satan about the end of the world. But he's charged with getting a Mac computer out of a locker in Grand Central Station, and he's God has charged him to open the fifth seal, and on New Year's Eve, 1999, and bring about the end of the world. And Jesus is conflicted, and I won't give it away. So, um, yeah, there's when you think the world is going to end, why do you need to be environmentally conscious or work to make the planet better? Because it's all going to be destroyed and replaced. Then then you have movies like 2012, where there's a great flood, and it's the ultimate settler colonial fantasy. It's not a rapture film. But those who are on the special arks get to repopulate Africa and the planet. Well, they land in Africa, South Africa, in the mountains when the water starts to recede. So there's some very problematic ethical implications here with the rapture. So it's rather than focusing on the here and now and what's happening at our border, what's happening with refugees and what's happening with global warming. I mean, it was 84 degrees in Atlanta today. you start to think, well, where is our focus, right? So
Definitely. Sort of where's our focus leading here? Joshua Scott also asks, he says, your presentation was also fascinating to see how gender and race are depicted in the modern American conceptions of rapture. Can you say more on this topic? How do individuals spanning the gender spectrum fare in the eschatological imagination of America?
yeah. Well, yeah, it depends on the source. Well, the Left Behind series has been critiqued for the main character, Chloe, is she's able to have a child with one of the main characters, but then to continue the race during the tribulation because they're part of the tribulation force. So it's a kind of militaristic tribulation fantasy too. Um, and then she dies. So women are not and in Omega Code and Megiddo, their women are not the leading characters. It's a battle, it's a very masculinist battle. Um, and in Megiddo, the vice president of the United States becomes the leader of a united force to fight the forces of Satan. And the armies are all wearing red. It's just very um, uh, charged with, red, China, Russia, the Cold War being fought out past the actual historic Cold War. So I think gender-wise, women do not fare well in the Book of Revelation, as I've argued in my work, but that's much disagreed with. I think the 144,000 males who make it into heaven, I think it's an all-male heaven, except for the Tree of Life. Tree of Life sneaks in. Tree of Life is a goddess figure, feminine, divine, but it's not a logical vision. So to try to unpack that you don't get too far with that. But I think also that rapture, it really fuels the imagination to think, oh, it could happen any minute, right? You don't know when. Thief in the night. And Jesus in, Mark 13 and parallels talks about that too. One will be taken in a field and the other remain. And it's always been part of human imagination to imagine the end. And beginnings and endings are the hardest, and they're the most controversial in biblical text and in theological thinking. So with Hiroshima and Nagasaki, you had a change in theological thinking with Sally McFaig and others who you can't do theology the same way if you have nuclear weapons, right? It's so their focus was more realistic on how do we keep the planet going because this is our God's creation. And for Sally McFaig, the earth is the body of God, and we're to care for it. Catherine Keller does similar work around that.
I had another question. A lot of your examples have this sort of like get rapture ready and the like leave notes for your loved ones, but to pair sort of getting ready or like preparing the people who will be left behind seems not in continuity with just sort of this lack of concern for the planet. So is there this consistent, I guess, dissonance between sort of getting ready? I haven't read any of the like what's on the checklist to get rapture ready, but I was super fascinated by this idea of like, shouldn't in theory you just be a good Christian, whatever that means in rapture theology, and you like have ticked all the boxes? So I'm curious about these rapture ready lists.
Yeah, well, it's a way for it's sort of Fox News for rapture theologians. If you read the news with a rapture lens, then, or, an imminent end of time lens, then you're going to get somewhere, you're going to get to a different point. Um, and if you're an insider and others had a chance and they turned it down, that's on them. There's no, um, this is the opposite of the Unitarian Universalist theology, you know. So it's not an inclusive vision. It's a very demarcated. These people are evil and these are good. Um, and that you see, that's being played out in the political arena, as we see with certain politicians. Well, all politicians get to be antichrist, but certain ones even more so.
Absolutely. Just, I guess, a final call for questions here. If anyone in the chat is holding on to their question, now would be a time to give it. If not, giving people a couple seconds to type. If not, is there any sort of parting words you would like to leave us with? Or John, do you have a question?
No, I don't.
Okay.
Well, I'm wondering if anyone has any pop culture rapture uh references that you've run across.
That you haven't mentioned, unless you want to count my aunt.
Yeah, I have relatives who, believe they are rapture ready. And I think the Simpsons episode really got at that quite well, where Homer does get to be one of the elect of all things and can't
Of
stand
all people.
of all people. And he can't stand it because he's separated from his family. So I think the emotion, Criminal Minds, oh yeah, Wheel of Time, yeah. There's also a young adult series called Gone, Gone, and there's so much. If you go to a scholastic book fair at any school, it's like Dystopia City. Um, and that's, I think horror, has that kind of emotive. And this is horror. Um, especially that I wish we'd all been ready stuff.
Professor Pippin, you mentioned dystopia. Do you believe that in modern times these dystopian fantasies are rooted in biblical apocalypticism?
Yeah, many of them are. I mean, like you look at something like 2012, but that's a lot of environmental disasters, chemical disasters. I mean, you can, and of course, the plague outbreak and
Yeah,
all those horror movies. And then zombies and more zombies of different kinds, and for different, causes. Um, yeah, I think it's a catharsis. And, Adele Yarborough Collins said this about the book of Revelation years and years ago, that it's apocalyptic is cathartic. You get into the crisis and into the emotion of that really heavy. And, you can, you know, you walk out, you finish reading the apocalyptic text and the sun is shining, and or you walk out of the movie theater. Um, and so it's, yeah, Stephen King's novels, especially The Stand,
yeah,
of course. And um, I think they're it's popular, these horror, Clive Barker and the rest, Wes Craven's films
yeah,
are popular for a reason. And
yeah,
apocalyptic has both horror and humor, um, making fun of the beast, of the Roman Empire.
yeah,
Definite political connections. But yeah, it's like we need that to function. We need to get out our worst fears that
yeah,
I did in my doctoral work with Professor Glenn Stassen, we did a lot of anti-nuclear work. And, the nuclear fear, I mean, if I had my apocalypse list, that would be number one.
Yeah.
Number two, unfortunately, now that I've read too much, is artificial intelligence and the moment of the singularity. So, we have plenty of apocalyptic things to draw from, but
Yeah.
the future, um, gives comfort to some people, and for others like me who didn't grow up with that theology, you know, it means the beginning of this really terrible dystopic fantasy,
Yeah. Sure. Thank you.
tribulation. So, and the desire of that, I think is perverse. I mean, why do we desire an end? Why do we desire, uh, ecological destruction? Um, and want to be part of that, and be one of the group of few survivors that carries on the planet. It just
Yeah.
it seems counterintuitive to an inclusive, loving, compassionate deity.
Yeah. Just the car accidents alone, gives me, I have a big problem with that.
Yeah, planes fall out of the sky.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and a lot of naked people going up to heaven.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
No grape leaves. No,
No, no, not
no.
like this. Yeah. Yeah, so I think there's apocalypse all the way through. I mean, we can't escape it for a reason.
Mhm.
Um it's it's part of our it can be motivation to you know, work for a better world instead of a different um heavenly infused world, I guess, where
Mhm.
the current Jerusalem's destroyed, so the new Jerusalem can plop down. There's a lot of problems with that.
Mhm.
Uh,
Awesome. Well, I'm not seeing any further questions. So while we were scheduled to go for a little bit longer, if we don't have any more questions, no need to all sit here staring at each other on Zoom. So I just want to thank you so much for your time, Dr. Pippin. This was
Yes.
such a
Thank you.
wonderful talk. John, do you have any words of closing?
I just want to thank you, and hope that all goes well with you there in Decatur, and I'll be reading your materials.
right. Thank you. Yeah,
Sure.
my next book is actually on Jesus, which is also apocalyptic, I think.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah, that's how I got
I'll be
artificial.
looking for it.
All right.
All right. Thank
Well,
you so much.
all right. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.